Hey guys, tonight we infiltrate the dark inner court of Henry VIII, the king who devoured 6 wives, turned closest friends into enemies, and ruled with a rotting heart. Yet behind that gilded crown lie chilling mysteries that will make your hair stand on end, blood-soaked schemes in shadowy corridors. The gasping screams of the condemned echoing through turrets, and secret letters revealing murder pacts as cold as ice. Today, we will unveil the 10 darkest secrets that the Tudor court tried to hide, where every wooden door conceals a crime that can never be washed clean. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And now, let me know, where are you watching from? And what time is it there in your local time zone? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. And before we begin our exploration, I want to emphasize that these 10 truths have been compiled from a variety of historical records, writings, and sources. Some details are well documented, while others remain unverified rumors. I sincerely hope you will watch through all 10 secrets, so we can together discern which accounts are genuine history and which are legend or fabrication. We are all part of a history-loving community. So if you find any information convincing or have questions about its accuracy, please don't hesitate to leave a comment below so we can discuss and clarify together. Horrifying darkest secret number 10, betraying faith for power. To begin, relax your body and take a deep breath as we drift into the story of a king once celebrated as the defender of the faith, but who ultimately trampled that very belief underfoot. Henry VIII. Born Henry Tudor on the 28th of June in the year 1407 at Greenwich Palace, was the second of 3 children of King Henry VII and Queen Elizabeth of York. His elder brother, Prince Arthur, died at the age of 15, unexpectedly elevating Henry from backup heir to direct successor. The Tudor bloodline, blending English and Norman royal heritage, bore the weighty task of restoring the dynasty's glory after the bloody Wars of the Roses. At the age of 17, in the year 1501, Henry ascended the throne upon his father's death. He ruled the Kingdom of England for 36 years, until his passing on the 28th of January in the year 1527. During those 3 decades, he left an indelible mark, consolidating royal authority, building a formidable royal navy, ordering coastal fortifications to guard against France and the Holy Roman Empire, and fostering the flourishing of Renaissance art and architecture in London and Hampton Court. Yet these accomplishments only accentuated darker flaws. Henry VIII loved hunting, music, and dancing, but his hot temper and boundless ambition often let desire eclipse reason. When Catherine of Aragon, his first wife, failed to produce a surviving male heir, he relentlessly sought to sever ties with the Roman Church, to remarry, casting aside all moral constraints. Crowned defender of the faith by Pope Leo V, Henry VIII penned Defense of the 7 Sacraments to condemn Martin Luther as a heretic. He wielded sword and scripture in tandem to champion Catholic tradition. But when his request for an annulment was denied, that faith shattered like fragile glass. Within a few years, he ordered the dissolution of monasteries across England, demolished ancient libraries, and seized countless sacred treasures. Thousands of monks and priests were expelled and left to starve or dragged before public courts if they refused to recognize him as the supreme head of the Church of England. These so-called reforms were not genuine spiritual renewal, but a sweeping assault on the Church's wealth. Altars that once echoed with prayers were emptied to house golden reliquaries. Hymns were drowned out by the clang of chains and the screams of those condemned. The Tudor court plunged into a shadow of atrocity, as the Bible, once a symbol of love and compassion, became a razor-sharp weapon in Henry's hands. By candlelight, the gilded throne could not mask the odor of incense, mingled with festering wounds. The incurable ulcer on the king's leg served as a grim reminder that unchecked power can rot from within. Henry VIII, once lauded as the great protector of Christendom, ultimately traded his faith to satisfy ambition. leaving thousands trembling souls before a new tribunal known as the Church of England. We may look back on the triumphant pages of history, Henry's establishment of the Church of England, the break with Rome, the founding of a national cathedral, but each step was stained with blood and destruction. Faith was reduced to a tool, religion, a facade for personal power. On silent nights, amid the lapping waves and the creaking of palace doors, whispers recall Henry VIII, the king who once bore the banner of Catholicism, yet wielded his holy writ as a weapon. Secret number 10 lays bare the truth for him. No limit existed to personal power, not even the cruelty of crushing his own faith. And as the candle's flame dwindles, allow your spirit to settle upon the image of a king soaring in glory, sinking into sin, standing at history's crossroads, where faith and power clashed fiercely, and only one could endure. Horrifying darkest secret number 9, the mysterious children. After just immersing ourselves in the tale of betraying faith for power, allow your mind to gently drift as we unveil the next secret. A hidden corner. Few dare mention in the Tudor inner court. Henry VIII yearned for a legitimate male heir to secure the Tudor dynasty. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon, despite 3 decades of devotion, failed to produce a surviving prince. The sense of loss and fear of dynastic collapse weighed heavily on the king's mind, leading him to divorce his first queen. Yet few speak of the mysterious children Henry may have abandoned. Seedlings of power buried in darkness. Officially, Henry acknowledged only one illegitimate child, Henry Fitzroy, born of a secret liaison with Elizabeth Blount. Prince Fitzroy was granted the titles Duke of Richmond and Somerset, and a generous inheritance, even prepared as a backup successor, should no legitimate son be born. But fate was cruel to the lonely boy. At the age of 16, Fitzroy died amid the court's sorrow. His death stunned Henry and ignited whispers of other unknown children. Rumours of the king's illegitimate offspring echoed through taverns, noble halls, and handwritten chronicles. People whispered of babies born to loyal ladies in waiting, to seductive nobles, or to women encountered by the king on his journeys to the northern realms or to France. In the candlelit bedchambers, these murmurs crept like thin smoke throughout the inner court, leaving courtiers both intrigued and terrified. Century later, historians even hypothesized that Mary Boleyn, sister of Anne Boleyn, bore Henry at least 2 children. Yet, under the relentless pressure of politics and royal power, any official acknowledgement was expunged from the record. Each child raised outside the Tudor court served as a dangerous reminder that Henry's power did not stem solely from divine right, but also from the flesh and desire he could not control. Though Fitzroy was gifted and educated as a prince, his status remained far beneath that of a legitimate heir. When Fitzroy died, the Tudor family concealed his passing as a political maneuver, erasing all traces and locking the secret away in closed archives. Hampton Court's halls once rang with sorrowful cries for Fitzroy. Now they stand as silent screens for anonymous shadows. Whenever Henry received his ministers, behind the velvet drape, there may have been that secret prince listening, waiting for acknowledgement yet never to see the light. The whispers of these invisible children haunted the court. Henry's power, in the eyes of his nobles, was like a hidden spiderweb spanning the kingdom, yet as fragile as a breeze that could scatter the king's honour. Sadly, centuries later, these stories became mere folklore. Simple documents and handwritten letters were seized or vanished. Posterity knows only of Fitzroy, forgetting the countless seedlings lost to darkness. In a wind-whipped chamber, the scent of burnt incense lingering, one still wonders how many young souls with Tudor blood have slipped quietly into oblivion. A sleepy voice murmurs like a lullaby, as if Henry himself once drifted through dreamy visions of unacknowledged children. Historians sharpen their quills, trimming their prose, chasing clues: a fingerprint in a ledger, a faded letter, symbols buried in courtly attire. But in the king's grasp, Power concealed every truth, like a mysterious child locked away in a gilded chest. And when the last candle guttered out, leaving only pale moonlight through the window, we realize the mysterious children are not merely a physical legacy, but a tainted inheritance of power and desire. They stand as a warning unnamed, lives forgotten. Even as every step Henry VIII took upon the throne sowed seeds of crime, waiting to sprout in the dark of the Tudor court. And now, as you drift in a half-slumber, let secret number 9, the mysterious children, rock you into dreams of anonymous souls, quietly dwelling in the secret-laden inner court. Horrifying darkest secret number 8, the eating madness that turned him into a monster after drifting dreamily through the ghosts of the mysterious children. Relax your body once more and gently glide into the next secret, witnessing how power paved the way for physical desire to transform a king into a dark monster. At the height of his power, Henry VIII appeared as the perfect royal image, tall, broad-shouldered, clad in gleaming gilded armor, diamonds sparkling on his wrists. But beneath that halo of glory, he was a compulsive eater beyond control. Each feast was not merely a meal, but a battle against life's fragility, a futile effort to fill the emptiness of his soul. Imagine tray upon tray of roasted swans, the steam rising, mingling with the rich aroma of seared flesh. Beside them lay a whole boar, its dark skin gleaming and fat splattering, displayed proudly on a platter. Pastries filled with venison and eels were stacked high, mocking the possibility of restraint. Wine flowed endlessly from oak barrels, poured into his mouth without pause. Tears of strength and despair, tracing his weary brow. Gradually, Henry's body transformed monstrously, a sagging belly draped over his thighs, his legs unable to bear the colossal weight. The palace installed reinforced chairs and doubled the width of doorways to allow him passage every step he took. The creak of the chair and the groan of his joints reminded all who watched of his deteriorating flesh. Most horrifying of all, his insatiable appetite only prolonged the ulcer on his leg, a secret that haunted the entire court. Pus and blood oozed constantly, seeping through velvet and silk. Despite physicians' advice to reduce fat, Henry demanded richer dishes to soothe his anger and fill the void in his spirit. Each bite was a rebellion against weakness. Yet the result was nothing but expanding layers of fat and the stench of a wound growing ever more putrid. During lavish banquets, courtiers would sometimes stifle laughs when they saw him leaning heavily into a table piled high with food. Even as the reeking odor from his sore clung to curtains and walls, they watched with morbid curiosity and fear as the king consumed his kingdom one mouthful at a time, growing heavier, slumping lower, as though devouring the very reputation and assets he had built. The scent of rotting flesh and sweet wine hung like a hazy mist over the marble floor, making the air suffocating and dreamlike. The clink of goblets, anxious whispers of the courtiers, and Henry's laboured breathing intertwined to paint the scene of a king transforming himself into a steely grey monster, writhing between royalty and rotting flesh. Henry VIII, once an emblem of power and masculine beauty, ultimately became the living embodiment of carnage, a tale of bottomless craving, a madness of consumption that consumed both his realm and his spirit. This is the horrifying darkest secret number 8, revealing the truth that unlimited power can turn even the greatest human into a colossal monster. Shattered from within, let your sleepy dream carry you further into the night, where only the sound of silent waves and a full stomach remain. As you continue with us to uncover the next secret in this harrowing journey, horrifying darkest secret, number 7, the savage punishments that terrorized England. Having just drifted through the grotesque spectacle of unrestrained gluttony, allow your mind to gently settle as we slip into the next shadowy chamber of Tudor terror. Here, we witness how Henry VIII ruled not by law alone, but by a reign of fear so profound that every whispered dissent echoed like a death knell. Under Henry's rule, the slightest hint of defiance, summoned punishments more brutal than any written code. Those accused of high treason faced the full horror of public torture, first drawn and quartered, then hanged until near death, only to have their entrails torn from their bodies while still alive. Their gasps and screams, the spatter of blood, and the sickening spectacle of organs plucked out before onlookers blended into a macabre symphony of agony. Finally, their headless torsos were divided into 4 limbs and displayed at the city gates, a gruesome warning to all who dared oppose the crown. Treason was only the beginning. Even lesser crimes, like cheating customers or suspected poisoning, incurred merciless reprisals. Bakeries where the loaves ran light found their owners' ears nailed to their shop doors, the flesh raw and bleeding. Accusations of poisoning prompted burnings at the stake. The crackling flames, merging with the victims' panicked shrieks. While the silent crowd watched in numb horror, no one, from the lowliest serf to the highest noble, enjoyed immunity. Those who once dined beside Henry at grand feasts could suddenly find themselves begging for a swift blow of the axe amid the same stone-paved market square. Each execution was orchestrated as a dark carnival, transforming London's streets into theatres of death. Inventive cruelty became a twisted art form under the king's sanction. Public hangings were scheduled alongside markets and festivals, the scaffold rising like a grim centerpiece. Crowds gathered at dawn, children clutching their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed at the sight of bodies hanging limply as carrion birds circled overhead. Meanwhile, officials roamed the spectators, ensuring silence and order. Even as the air grew thick with the scent of sweat and blood, the trepidation Henry inspired went beyond the executioner's block. False accusations could summon swift ruin. A neighbour's rumour might brand a woman, a witch, or a man, a poisoner. And before the sun set, that person could be paraded through the streets, bound and broken. The king's paranoia rippled through every layer of society, turning friend against friend and family against family. Courtiers learned to watch their tongues and conceal their true thoughts, lest a careless word land them at the mercy of a sword or fire. Thomas More, once Henry's trusted chancellor and companion, fell victim to these draconian whims. More's steadfast refusal to accept Henry's religious supremacy led to his arrest, trial, and execution. His final walk to the block was said to be composed and dignified, even as he whispered prayers for the very faith Henry had betrayed. Thomas Cromwell, the architect of the Reformation itself, likewise met a sudden end, betrayed by his own king. Cromwell was executed without trial. His body surrendered to the same streets where he had once enforced Henry's will. In provinces beyond London, news of these atrocities spread like a dark plague. Peasants in Yorkshire and Cornwall heard of neighbours drawn and quartered for minor offences, and their fields lay fallow in fear. Merchants calculated risks before trading widowed shops, unsure if their goods would be seized, or if they themselves might be branded traitors for questioning taxes. The once proud common law courts became mere extensions of the king's will, their gavel replaced by the executioner's axe. To this day, chroniclers of the age struggle to capture the full horror of that regime. Accounts speak of entire families fleeing their homes at the mere mention of Henry's patrols. Some historians argue that this terror secured the Tudor dynasty's stability. Fear proved a more potent glue than any oath of loyalty. Yet others see it as the stain that ultimately eroded the king's legitimacy, planting seeds of resentment that would flower in later uprisings and rebellions. The psychological weight of these punishments extended far beyond their immediate victims. Courtiers and commoners alike spoke of the shadow of the axe, the invisible blade that might strike at any moment. Sleep became fitful. Dreams were haunted by visions of rope and fire, by the sound of whetstones, sharpening blades in the night. Even the grandest banquet halls, once filled with music and laughter, I fell silent at the fear that any toast could provoke a toast of tears. And so, as you drift in a half-slumber, recall the echo of shackles and the glint of sharpened steel. Remember, this was not merely the enforcement of law, but the orchestration of terror, Henry's most horrifying secret, the seventh revelation of his dark reign. In a kingdom where a man could be literally torn limb from limb for speaking his mind, the line between justice and cruelty dissolved in a pool of blood beneath the gallows. Let this uneasy knowledge settle in your dreams as the candle gutters final flame, and prepare yourself for the next secret that waits just beyond the veil of sleep. Horrifying darkest secret number 6. The bloody love affairs. After the grim horrors of savage punishments, allow your mind to drift once more into the candlelit court, where kisses could turn to blood and marriage vows to mortal danger. Now, we explore the perilous liaisons that stained Henry VIII's bedchamber and drenched Tudor history in crimson. To wed Henry VIII was to enter a diamond-studded cage lined with hidden blades. He first wooed Catherine of Aragon with honeyed words and regal splendour, making her queen after her first husband's death. For 3 decades, Catherine remained loyal, bearing him a daughter, Mary, but never a son. When she failed to produce a living prince, Henry's devotion curdled into contempt. Catherine was stripped of her titles and confined to a dim, lonely palace, far from court, forbidden even to see her only child. In her place rose Anne Boleyn, the court's fiery dancer. From lowly lady-in-waiting, Anne ascended to queen by Henry's command, fueling the schism with Rome. But the same king who crowned her soon darkened her fate. Accused of adultery and incest charges, most historians now deem fabricated, Anne faced a swift trial and execution. On that cold morning, her neck met the executioner's blade, and Henry dined in celebration mere hours later. Next came Jane Seymour, the third queen and the bearer of Henry's most fervent hope, a male heir. When she gave birth to Edward, young prince and Tudor dream, the court rejoiced. Yet 3 days later, Jane succumbed to complications from childbirth. In his grief, perhaps relief, Henry mourned her as his true and tender wife, dubbing her the final angel who fulfilled his quest. Her death marked both triumph and tragedy, sealed with her blood. Subsequent marriages turned ever darker. Anne of Cleves arrived from Germany as a political alliance but was mocked for her appearance. Henry rejected her within months, calling the match a beer barrel rather than a bride, and annulled the union without bloodshed. But with great humiliation for Anne, Catherine Howard, his teenage 5th wife, brought youth and innocence to the court, but fell victim to court gossip and accusations of infidelity. At Borelli-Nintin, Catherine stood trial and was beheaded, her screams echoing across Tower Green. Finally, Catherine Parr, the 6th and last queen, survived only by skillfully navigating court politics and religious reform. She placated Henry's shifting affections and manoeuvred between Protestant and Catholic factions, sparing her life through wit rather than lineage. Her survival was testament to her talents, not her loyalty, and even she lived under the constant threat of the king's unpredictable wrath. Through these successive unions, Henry treated his queens not as women with hearts and souls, but as political chess pieces. He moved them across the board to secure alliances, produce heirs. Or, satisfit carnal, désir, when they no longer served his purpose, he discarded them with ruthless efficiency, stripping title, fortune, and sometimes life. Each marriage forged a chapter in Tudor turmoil, a testament to a king who believed his desires were divine commands. Behind the velvet curtains, whisperers spoke of clandestine confessions and midnight councils, where Henry's bedchamber echoed with urgent whispers of fate and betrayal. Courtier, once entranced by Anne's wit or Jane's grace, learned quickly to conceal admiration, for fear of association with a fallen queen. The scaffold became as familiar to the royal household as the throne itself, reminding everyone that at Henry's court, love and death were intertwined. Despite his outward grandeur, gilded chambers, sumptuous banquets, elaborate masks, the king's heart grew calloused. He pursued new brides as rapidly as he shed old ones. A cycle of infatuation, disappointment, and elimination. His quest for a male heir, wrapped in the mantle of dynastic necessity, masked a deeper hunger, an obsession that consumed women and left behind a trail of shattered lives and scarlet stains on stone floors. These bloody liaisons reveal a monarch who saw marriage as a tool for power, faith, an obstacle to ambition, and human life as expendable currency. Catherine of Aragon's lonely exile, Anne Boleyn's tragique demise, Jane Seymour's fatal sacrifice, Anne of Cleves's public humiliation, Catherine Howard's untimely death, and Catherine Parr's political survival all underscore the brutal reality Henry's affections could as readily turn lethal as loving. To this day, history recalls these queens' names with reverence and pity. Their portraits hang in hushed galleries, capturing gazes that once held hope for love and legacy. Yet behind each smile lies the echo of sharpened steel and broken vows. Scholars debate motives and machinations, yet the bones beneath Tower Green still whisper of young lives ended too soon, of alliances sealed by blood, and of a king whose own heart may have been as fractured as the dynastic bonds he sought to secure. And so, as you drift closer to slumber, imagine the hush of court corridors, the soft rustle of silk, and the sudden clang of iron gates. Feel the ache of lost love, the sting of betrayal, and the chill of eternity that awaited each queen whose fate was bound to Henry's capricious will. Let this final memory of bloody love affairs settle into your dreams, a lullaby of steel and sorrow, as you await the next secret lurking in the shifting shadows of Tudor terror. Horrifying darkest secret number 5, the festering wound that haunted the court. After witnessing the bloody love affairs that stained Tudor history, let your mind drift again into the dim corridors of the palace, where a single injury became the wicked heartbeat of Henry VIII's decaying power. Hidden beneath opulent garments and royal pomp, the ulcer on Henry's leg was a ghastly secret that terrified the entire court. What began as a simple scratch when the king took a fall from his horse during a joust spiraled into a wound that would never heal. Year after year, physicians probed the sore, scraping out pus and blood, stuffing it with soaked linen swabs dipped in wine or vinegar. Yet the foul discharge refused to stop, a grim tide that seeped through bandages and left his sheets stained. The stench of rot clung to tapestries and draped itself along velvet-draped hallways. Courtiers burned incense and scattered rose petals to mask the odor. But no fragrance could conquer the stench of decaying flesh. When Henry entered a chamber, those present first caught the odor of corruption rather than the shimmer of silk and gold. A single step would prompt a cry of agony from the king, his rage flaring as excruciating pain sliced through him like jagged shards of ice. His temper, already volatile, grew more savage with each agonizing moment. The constant torment robbed Henry of normal mobility. He could no longer ride his beloved steed, nor dance at courtly balls. Instead, he was borne on litter chairs or wheeled on improvised boards to move from chamber to chamber. His throne room became an obstacle course of reinforced furniture and widened doorways, designed to accommodate his swollen body and prevent further injury. Each turn of his weight on the gurney felt like an electric shock through the ulcer, forcing him to howl as though pleading for release. This wound was more than physical suffering. It symbolized the decay of a once mighty ruler. While the throne remained gilded and imposing, the true power resided in the festering lesion hidden beneath layers of finery. The gangrene gnawing at his leg spoke a bitter truth: even the grandest empire can rot from within. Henry VIII, once proud of his sword and armor, was left in his final days, surrounded by the sickening scent of his own flesh as it gave way to death. Physicians experimented desperately, applying salves made of mercury and honey, invoking prayers and charms in the hope of divine intervention. Monks chanted in shadowed chapels, beseeching saints to spare their king. Yet the ulcer throbbed on, feeding off his strength and will. Courtiers whispered that the wound had become a living entity, demanding constant appeasement, with richer dishes to salve Henry's despair, even as those same banquets only exacerbated the infection. By candlelight, the king's pallid leg glistened with oozing fluid. Servants moved swiftly to adjust his pillow. Fearful of upsetting the fragile balance between agony and numbness, guests at evening feasts strained to mask their distaste, stamping the boards underfoot to distract from the drip of poison-like liquid vanishing into the velvet beneath. The sight of the ulcer, swollen and blackened at the edges, seared itself into the memory of anyone unlucky enough to glimpse it. In those quiet hours, when the great hall lay dark and the castle's stones echoed with dripping moisture, the ulcer's pulse seemed to join the heartbeat of the kingdom. It was as though every drop of pus was a drop of royal blood, bleeding slowly into the annals of history. The rot ate at Henry's flesh, and, by extension, at the monarchy itself. His decrees rang hollow, his portraits lost their heroic sheen, his name became synonymous with decay. Yet even in his suffering, Henry refused to be weakened. He insisted on attending councils, issuing proclamations, and demanding feasts in his honor. Each appearance was a defiant claim that he still ruled. Despite the disease, eating him from the inside out, his courtier, torn between loyalty and revulsion, clung to every gesture, every command, as proof that the king was still sovereign, not a dying man dominated by a deadly wound. And so, as you drift towards slumber, let the image of that ghastly ulcer linger, a wound that refused to heal, a symbol of a king's descent from glory into corruption. Feel the chill of decay in the silent corridors and the hum of distant incense failing to mask the stench. This is the horrifying truth that haunted Henry VIII's final years. The fifth darkest secret of a tyrant whose legacy was carved in both steel and rot. Let the echo of his agony settle into your dreams as the candle gutters final flicker, and prepare to uncover the next shadow in our journey through Tudor terror. Horrifying darkest secret number 4. The final descent into madness. Having witnessed the festering wound that haunted the court, let your thoughts drift once more into the shadowed corners of Whitehall as we uncover the next nightmare, the final descent of Henry VIII's mind into utter madness. In his youth, Henry VIII exuded confidence and charm. He strode beside the throne with a broad smile, laughing among courtiers and facing his rivals without fear. His physical prowess was legendary. Jousting tournaments showcased his skill, and banquets displayed his vitality. Yet after years of dissolving monasteries, ordering executions, and enduring the constant pain of his rotting leg, the king's mind began to unravel. Night after night, Henry would awaken drenched in sweat beneath heavy velvet drapes. His heart pounded like a war drum, and his eyes reflected pure terror. Phantoms emerged in his chamber, the stern visage of his father, Henry VII, scolding him for his betrayals, the pale faces of his discarded wives, Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Catherine Howard, each with eyes of cold accusation. Shadowy priests and wild, wailing infants appeared at his bedside, their cries echoing in the gloom. The king's screams reverberated through the corridors, sending guards and ladies in waiting scurrying in panic. As the nightmares deepened, so did Henry's paranoia. He became convinced that his own courtiers plotted to poison every goblet of wine, every courteous bow behind his back, every whispered greeting. He imagined cloaked dagger blades waiting to strike. A simple scribe presenting a petition might be branded a traitor, hauled before the Tower for a quick trial and unceremonious execution. Even Catherine Parr, his sixth and final wife, nearly lost her life when her earnest religious debates were twisted into allegations of heresy. Henry's mind resembled a shattered mirror, one shard reflecting memories of triumphant processions and romantic promises, the next shard stained with the darkness of his own atrocities and his body's vile decay. He barricaded himself in his chambers, surrounding his bed with smouldering incense and rose petals, an attempt to mask the miasma of fear that clung to every stone. Yet no swirl of smoke could banish the phantoms conjured by his guilt and torment. By day, he could still don the royal robes and pass decrees. But behind the mask of authority sat a broken soul. His council meetings grew erratic. One moment he issued orders with regal composure. The next he would lash out, demanding the heads of imagined conspirators. Courtiers came to dread the unpredictable flashes of rage that erupted over innocuous comments. His paranoia turned every whisper into a threat, every glance into an act of betrayal. In the flickering torchlight, Henry would pace the great hall, clutching his bandaged leg, his face contorted by both physical agony and mental torment. He spoke to thin air, addressing unseen enemies, his voice alternating between frantic pleas and low, venomous threats. Servants dared not approach him unless summoned. Even his closest advisers kept a fearful distance, aware that any misstep might provoke a deadly command. This relentless spiral of madness consumed the final years of Henry's reign. The man who once believed himself a divine protector of faith became a prisoner of phantom sins. His dreams offered no refuge, only visions of the bloodied scaffold, of severed heads and burning flesh. In those nightmares, he saw his own reflection in the eyes of the condemned, the silent accusation of every life he had destroyed. When at last his body succumbed to gangrene and age, Henry lay broken in his final bed. Not the triumphant monarch of old, but a man ravaged by his own cruelty and by the ghosts of his victims. The thunder of hooves that once announced his arrival now echoed empty in deserted courtyards. The corridors that had trembled at his command fell silent, save for the whisper of distant wind through iron gates. His legacy, forged in blood and madness, was sealed not by the deeds of a sovereign, but by the unravelling of a mind lost to terror. And so, let the echo of Henry VIII's final madness lull you into restless slumber. Picture the king alone in his chamber, beset by phantoms born of his own excesses and torments. Feel the chill of fear that even royalty could not escape. The dreadful knowledge that no crown can shield a mind from the horrors it has wrought. Close your eyes and drift, if you dare, into dreams haunted by the fourth darkest secret of Tudor terror. Horrifying darkest secret number 3. Death as a weapon. Having seen how the king's own pain and paranoia consumed him, let your thoughts drift gently as we move from the tortured mind of Henry VIII into the cold calculus of his most lethal tool, death itself. Henry VIII did not rely solely on law or the might of his armies. He transformed death into an instrument of power, wielded as precisely as any sword. Under his reign, the Tower of London ceased to be merely a fortress or a prison. It became a theatre of execution, where the condemned were not merely put to death, but displayed as living warnings to anyone who might dare defy the crown. Take Thomas More, for instance. Once Henry's trusted chancellor, More broke bread at the royal table and shared in the king's confidence. Yet More refused to acknowledge Henry as supreme head of the Church of England, holding fast to his own conscience. For that act of conscience, More was branded a traitor. On a spring morning, beneath the blooming gardens of Chelsea, he was led to the block. The executioner's axe fell swiftly, and More's head rolled into the basket, an unthinkable betrayal of a friendship once thought unbreakable. Then there was Thomas Cromwell, the very architect of Henry's religious revolution. Cromwell had masterminded the dissolution of the monasteries and the creation of a national church under Henry's control, yet no degree of service guaranteed his safety. One night, Cromwell, already old and frail, was arrested at Whitehall. By dawn, he stood accused of treason. As the tower bells tolled, he climbed the scaffold and met the same fate he had devised for others, his head severed, his body consigned to an unmarked grave. But Henry's lethal reach extended far beyond the great and powerful. Commoners, too, faced this grim machinery of death. A starving baker caught skimping on the weight of his loaves could find himself bound and drawn to the gallows. A daring pamphleteer who dared criticize the king's seizure of church lands might be hauled off to face the rack and then the noose. Even landless tenants squabbling over a few acres could be branded rebels, marched through crowded streets, and executed as traitors. These punishments were never simple affairs. Each was staged as a public spectacle, an unholy pageant designed to terrorize. Imagine the town square on a market day, merchants hawking cloth and spices, children chasing each other between stalls. And, at the raised scaffold in the center, a condemned figure, begging for mercy. From dawn's first light until the last stroke of the executioner's axe, crowds gathered in horrified fascination, their faces lit by the same torches that would be used to burn heretics later that year. Henry took a peculiar pleasure in the process. Chroniclers of the day whisper of the king smiling broadly as names were read out. Thomas More, Thomas Cromwell, Lady Rochford, each name pronounced with chilling precision. Every letter counted. Every comma, marking a life, cut short. Some say Henry insisted that the clerk record the list with immaculate brevity, as though condensing centuries of history into a single stroke of the pen. This murderous roster, as a courtier called it, bolstered Henry's grim reputation. Not just a king who wielded armies, but a true executioner-in-chief. Power, in Henry's hands, did not flow merely from statutes or royal proclamations. It pulsed through the instrument of execution, the sword, the axe, and later the grim iron of the guillotine. Imported in legend, if not in fact, he decided who would live and who would die. And his decisions were made public, engraved on the memories of those who witnessed his decrees. To stand before Henry's court was to stand before the jaws of death itself. In this context, every act of governance became tinged with fear. A merchant negotiating taxes might glance suspiciously at a tax collector, fearful that any misstep could be interpreted as disloyalty. A noble hostess might hesitate before inviting a controversial cleric to a dinner party, knowing that a single ill-chosen word could bring the executioner's noose to her own household gates. Even the quietest aristocrat trembled, aware that even a simple petition to the crown could end with the ringing of the tower gates. This terror rippled across the kingdom. Bishops, who once debated theology in the Grand Hall of Westminster, found themselves preaching apologies to Henry in hushed tones. Peasants who tilled their fields deemed it safer to grin and bow at passing patrols, never daring to question why crops were seized for royal revenue. In every village and every town, the shadow of the block darkened the horizon, never far, always waiting. Yet Henry's use of death was not mere sadism. It was, to him, a form of governance, a brutal but efficient means of ensuring absolute obedience. He stripped dissenters of their titles, their lands, and ultimately their lives, leaving their families destitute. He did not simply punish, he eradicated opposition, turning it to dust so no seed of resistance could grow. This was Tudor rule at its most ruthless, a monarch who, by mastering mortality itself, guaranteed the stability of his throne. And so, as you drift toward slumber, let your mind linger on the echoing footsteps in the tower's corridors, the distant toll of its bells, and the silent hush that follows each execution. Picture the scaffold rising in the fog, the crowd parting like waves to reveal the condemned, and the king's thin smile carried on the wind. This, dear listener, is the third darkest secret of Henry VIII's reign, how he turned death into a weapon sharper than any blade, carving his dominion from the bones of those he ruled. Let that terror settle in your dreams as the final embers of candlelight flicker and fade. Horrifying darkest secret number 2. The curse of Tudor blood. Having witnessed how Henry VIII wielded death as a weapon, let your mind drift further into the twilight of Tudor history as we uncover the next dreadful secret, the curse that haunted his very bloodline. Throughout his life, Henry VIII dedicated every breath and decree to securing a legitimate male heir. Determined that the Tudor throne would remain unchallenged, his unwavering obsession consumed him, shaping alliances, igniting wars, and casting aside queens who failed to deliver the longed-for prince. When at last his third wife, Jane Seymour, bore him a son, Henry believed his dynastic nightmare was over. The newborn was christened Edward, future Edward VI, and for a moment the king's eyes glistened with relief and triumph. But fate proved a cruel jester. Young Edward, heir to the English throne, grew pale and frail, his small chest rattling with each breath. Despite the most lavish care and the finest physicians summoned from across Europe, the boy succumbed to consumption, later known as tuberculosis, at the tender age of 15. His death shattered Henry, plunging him into a despair deeper than any wound in his own decaying body. The once victorious king, who had conquered faith and clubbed down rivals, now faced the incomprehensible loss of his flesh and blood. In the wake of Edward's passing, the succession fell to Mary, Henry's elder daughter by Catherine of Aragon. Mary ascended as Mary I, determined to restore the Catholic faith her father had so violently rejected. Under her reign, England witnessed a reign of fire. Hundreds of Protestants were burned at the stake for refusing to recant, their screams echoing through the streets of London and beyond. The Queen's fervour earned her the grim title, Bloody Mary, yet her zealotry could not summon an heir. Mary died, childless, her body racked by phantom pregnancies and swollen with sorrow, leaving no Tudor seed in her womb. In the final act of this royal tragedy, Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, took the throne as Elizabeth I. Known as the Gloriana of the Golden Age, Elizabeth brought prosperity, naval triumphs, and a flowering of the arts to England. Her long reign stabilized the nation and saw Shakespeare's plays filling the Globe Theatre with wonder. Yet, despite her brilliance, Elizabeth never produced a child. She remained the Virgin Queen, a ruler without an heir, her court rife with speculation and courtship that ultimately led nowhere. When she breathed her last, the Tudor dynasty ended with her, leaving the crown to the Scottish Stuarts through distant kinship. Considered in its entirety, this sequence of tragic demises feels less like random misfortune and more like a curse upon Henry's blood. The king who tore churches apart to claim ultimate authority, who severed alliance after alliance to secure his lineage, watched each generation of his own descendants fade like petals in autumn wind. Edward VI died whispering broken prayers. Mary I died full of rage and regret. Elizabeth I died cloaked in loneliness despite 1,000 courtiers at her feet. Those who lived through the Tudor age asked themselves, had the divine right of kings turned against its chosen instrument? Had Henry's own betrayals of faith, of friends, of wives summoned a higher vengeance to claim his blood? Or was this simply the unyielding logic of dynastic rule? No matter how grand the empire, without a living successor, its legacy dissolves like mist at dawn, whatever the explanation. The Tudor bloodline's dissolution serves as a bitter testament to the peril of overreaching ambition. Imagine Henry in his final years, frail and bedridden, hearing of Edward's death, grasping Mary's fiery persecutions, and fearing Elizabeth's childless greatness. The hollow triumphs of his earlier life, the break with Rome, the glittering court, the brutal triumphs of the scaffold offered no comfort as the last flickers of his lineage died out. In his fevered dreams, he may have seen the graves of his children and grandchildren stretching beyond the horizon, their ghosts weeping for a dynasty undone by his own design. The halls of Hampton Court, which once rang with laughter and music, fell silent in the wake of this curse. Portraits of the royal family, meant to proclaim continuity and stability, came to mock the king's failures. The grand tapestries depicting Tudor victories darkened under layers of dust, as if retreating from the very walls that celebrated them. Even the heraldic banners, once proudly bearing the 3 lions of England, now seemed to droop under the weight of departed blood. In villages and towns across the realm, villagers whispered of omens, a cometa rending the sky when Edward was born, a plague of rats when Mary burned her heretics, a swarm of crows when Elizabeth rejected her final suitor. These superstitions spread among the common folk, weaving the narrative of a royal curse that transcended politics. Mothers hushed their children when saying Tudor, as though the mere name might tempt the fates to claim another innocent life. The Church, too, weighed in on the ominous pattern. Catholic priests blamed heresy brought by Henry. Protestant ministers decried the tyranny of papal exiles. Both sides pointed to Henry's religious upheaval as the root of the curse, arguing that when a king so brazenly defies divine will, God's judgment can fall upon his descendants. Whether or not one believes in divine retribution, the sequence of childless reigns and early deaths is undeniably chilling. Thus, the second darkest secret of Henry VIII's reign stands revealed: the curse of Tudor blood. A dynasty built on conquest and cruelty collapsed under the weight of its architect's sin. No child could inherit the throne. No marriage produced the knighted male heir Henry so desperately craved. The very blood he thought would secure his legacy became the instrument of its undoing. As you drift towards sleep, let the sorrowful echo of vanished heirs settle in your mind. Picture the empty cradles in the nursery, the silent halls of Whitehall and Hampton Court, and the final Tudor queen, gazing out at a kingdom she could not pass on. Feel the chill of a curse that reached beyond death, binding 3 ill-fated rulers in a tragic knot that not even a king's ambition could unravel. Close your eyes now, and let the memory of the Tudor blood curse haunt your dreams until the final secret emerges from the shadows. Horrifying darkest secret number 1. The terrifying final death. Having traced the curse that unraveled the Tudor bloodline, allow your mind to drift one last time into the silent chamber where Henry VIII faced his most dreadful secret, the ghastly end of life itself. Henry VIII, the king who once moved mountains of political intrigue and flooded courts with his desires, spent his final days sprawled upon an immense, reinforced bed. His body had ballooned into a grotesque caricature of its former strength, flesh sagging and decomposing under the strain of years of excess and injury. A council of Europe's finest physicians convened at his bedside in a desperate bid to halt the relentless advance of gangrene. Yet their salves, poultices, and cauterizations proved powerless, as the ulcer gnawed through muscle and sinew, blackening tissue and exuding a stench so potent that every door had to be sealed against the reek of rot. He could not shift his own weight. Each movement sent sprays of thin pus and fresh blood across his golden, canopied canopy. The bed linens were changed hourly, yet never did they emerge. Unstained the changing sheets, emerging with sickly brown blotches that no mortal scrub could erase. Henry lay panting, his breath short and ragged, as though each inhalation tore at his soul. Between coughs and moans, he murmured prayers and pleas to a God he had so often betrayed, his voice cracking with both physical agony and spiritual dread. When the final hour approached, the scene grew even more horrific. The king's regal funeral garments, silk-dyed royal purple and embroidered with gold thread, were drenched in oozing fluid from his festering wound. Legend holds that as his coffin was borne through the streets of Windsor, the weight of his decaying corpse split the lid. A torrent of blackened blood and viscous pus gushed onto the stone pavement, pooling beneath the feet of onlookers. Stray dogs, drawn by the odour of carrion, leaped forward to lap at the foul effluent. Priests and attendants scrambled to shove the coffin along, their faces contorted in horror as they abandoned the macabre scene to its own nightmarish tableau. There was no peaceful passing, no whispered benediction to soften the end, only the stench of corruption and the blaze of a state funeral that stained every banner, every torchlit procession, In shades of dread, Henry VIII, who had once declared himself God's chosen on earth and wielded unmatched authority, was finally laid low by the rot within his own body. His death stands as the ultimate testament. No throne, no crown, no army can triumph over the inevitability of decay and mortality. And so, as your eyelids grow heavy and the hush of the night deepens, let the echo of that final horror guide you into a somnolent reverie. Picture the heavy beer splitting, the river of dark fluid running free, and the shadow of a once mighty king, undone by the very vessel he relied upon to assert his will. This, dear listener, is the darkest secret of all the final victory of death over even the greatest powers of man. Close your eyes and let that chilling image drift you away into dreams shaded with the faint stench of ancient rot. And so we have journeyed through the 10 horrifying darkest secrets of Henry VIII, from religious conspiracies and illicit passions to that final ghastly death. Yet of all those tragedies, perhaps none is more haunting than the fates of his 6 queens women who stood beside the throne, only to be consumed by the will of a bloodthirsty king, each left with her own personal tragedy. To delve deeper into the shadowed turns of each life, we will now explore 6 parts, each revealing a sorrowful chapter full of secrets from the Tudor inner court. Let us begin this new journey. The first wife, Catherine of Aragon. Isolation and betrayal. Slowly relax your body, close your eyes, and join me as we sink into the tragic tale of Catherine of Aragon, who once walked beside Henry VIII to the sound of royal trumpets, only to be cruelly declared a traitor and imprisoned by the very man she loved. In her early 20s, Catherine arrived in England amid cheers and a grand procession under the Spanish banner. The English-Spanish alliance was once anticipated like a grand festival feast, promising political stability and the reinforcement of the Catholic faith. For many years, Catherine and Henry stood side by side at court. She was not only queen but celebrated as the defender of the faith. When the Pope bestowed that title upon Henry, their love began passionately, laughter echoing through the great hall. And Mary, their firstborn daughter, came into the world like a joyous sign. But gradually, Henry's attention turned from piano melodies to the pounding of his own heart. Driven by an obsession for a son, no matter how much devotion Catherine offered, she could not bear a surviving prince. Disappointment gathered like dark clouds on the horizon, leading to a religious crisis. Henry cited scripture from Leviticus, claiming that marriage within certain bloodlines was unlawful, and immediately petitioned the Pope to annul their union. When his plea was refused, he did not hesitate to wield political power. He pressured envoys, threatened to withdraw military support, and finally issued a decree stripping Catherine of her title as queen, cast from the throne. Catherine was not sent back to Spain but confined to Kimbleton. Torn from her beloved daughter Mary, the cold stone walls enclosed her, and every step she took was shadowed by spies recording her every word in secret reports sent to court. In her small chamber, Catherine endured her darkest days, no smiles, only the wind whistling through the window slits and the steady knock of the guards' boots. In the gloom, she no longer heard church bells, only the ache of her own betrayed heart. Day after day, Catherine grew gaunt, her skin pale from depression and illness. Physicians, in a final effort, applied vinegar-soaked cloths to the chest, wound of the heart. Not the flesh, but every remedy failed. Rumours spread through the palace. Catherine became listless, her voice hoarse, often gazing at Mary's portrait with silent tears. Isolation and the grief of losing her child and her status created a dark fog around her soul. Their once celebrated marriage, a symbol of a century-old alliance, now rang like a funeral bell for a broken family. Catherine had lost not only her crown and her freedom, but her final faith in love and justice. Historians would later record that Henry's power struggle ignited the first sparks of the Church of England's separation, paving the way for decades of religious and political upheaval. Yet Catherine's heart still smouldered with hope that Mary might one day return to her mother. I hope that God would look down and render just judgment. But her days of imprisonment in Kimbolton stretched on until her very last breath. When Catherine departed this life alone, with no one to guide her through the threshold of death, her sorrow lay thick as a night without dawn. And as you clutch your soft blanket a little tighter, let the image of Catherine of Aragon, the sorrowful queen, isolated and betrayed, linger in your mind. Remember that if a loyal heart can be crushed by the darkness of power, nothing is truly safe within the dagger-lined halls of the Tudor court. To Anne Boleyn, conspiracy, crime, and the fabrication of treason now. As you nestle deeper into the comfort of your blankets, let us drift from Catherine's lonely chamber to the glittering court that buzzed with scandal, and meet Anne Boleyn, the queen whose rise and fall was orchestrated by schemes darker than any midnight shadow. Anne Boleyn ascended the throne amid fierce controversy. Once Henry VIII's lady-in-waiting, she became the object of his relentless desire, so much so that the king invoked a queen's privilege, suspending certain laws to favour their union. Thomas Cromwell, the king's newly empowered chief minister, played a pivotal role in this Tudor revolution. Cromwell orchestrated the annulment of Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon, marshalled church courts, and built the administrative machinery that would crown Anne as queen, shattering centuries of tradition in the process. Yet, this very machinery would later be turned against her in a calculated campaign of character assassination. Rumours swirled through corridors and taverns that Anne had taken lovers among the king's trusted nobles. Whispers named Sir Henry Norris, Sir Francis Weston, and even her own brother, George Boleyn, as participants in unspeakable acts of infidelity and incest. These allegations were far more than salacious gossip. They formed the backbone of a deliberate effort to remove Anne from power and eliminate her bloodline from succession. The incest accusation, in particular, stands out as a grotesque fabrication. Witnesses were coaxed, or rather, coerced into giving damning testimonies. Sir Francis Weston later recanted, saying he had been threatened with torture unless he complied. Yet his words remained on record, bolstering the Crown prosecutor's case. Secret interrogations and forced confessions filled the docket, as men and women confessed to sins they likely never committed, fearing the rack more than the king's displeasure. Her trial was a bizarre mixture of public spectacle and private farce, presided over by judges loyal to Henry rather than independent jurists. Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, acted as Speaker of the Court, while Thomas Cromwell sat in the king's ear, ensuring each verdict served royal will. Although the proceedings were open to the citizenry, transparency was an illusion. Evidence was withheld from the defence. Witnesses were handpicked, and the jurors themselves knew that a verdict of not guilty might seal their own fate. Then, on a bleak June morning, the execution was carried out with chilling efficiency. A master swordsman from France, praised for his precision, was summoned to ensure that Queen Anne's head would be severed in a single, swift stroke. As she knelt on the scaffold, dressed in mourning black, she is said to have whispered a final prayer, her composure belying the terror that surely gripped her heart. Mere hours later, a banquet was held in the palace, cupcakes, tarts, and sweet wine toasting the king's renewed freedom. As though Anne's life had been nothing more than a fleeting inconvenience, the fallout echoed through the halls of power. Courtiers, once captivated by Anne's wit and grace, now wondered, in hushed tones, who will be next? The sight of noble heads rolling fueled an atmosphere of dread. Letters between earls spoke of midnight alarms, of sentries posted outside private chambers to guard against false charges. Even the king's closest allies found themselves second-guessing every pledge of loyalty, knowing that a single misstep might bring them to the block. Yet from this tragedy emerged a paradoxical consolidation of Henry's authority. By disposing of his queen, he demonstrated that no one, even a queen, was beyond his reach. His image as a monarch capable of radical change was cemented. Religious reforms that once seemed tentative now galloped forward, replacing monastic lands with royal estates. As any resistance was quelled by the fearsome example of Anne's fate. As you drift towards slumber, picture the empty scaffold in the tower's courtyard, the blood-stained block gleaming in the morning light, and the hush that fell over London as Anne's household was disbanded. Listen for the stifled sobs of her ladies-in-waiting, the clank of armour on the ramparts, and the distant toll of the chapel bell announcing the king's new resolve. Let this tale of betrayal and broken vows lull you into the deepest of dreams. And remember, in Henry VIII's realm, no heart, however regal, could escape the shadow of conspiracy and the blade of treason. 3. Jane Seymour, the Saviour Queen, and postnatal tragedy. Drift once more into the hush of midnight as we leave behind courtly conspiracies and step into a simpler, gentler chapter only to uncover a sorrow spun from even gentler threads. Now, we meet the third wife of Henry VIII, Jane Seymour, the woman heralded as the Saviour Queen, whose soft presence could not withstand the harsh toll of childbirth. Jane Seymour entered Henry's world like a quiet breeze after the storm of Anne Boleyn's drama, where Anne dazzled with sharp wit and rebellious spirit. Jane radiated a calming innocence. At court, she moved without fanfare, her demure smiles and steady gaze setting her apart. It was said that Henry, exhausted by scandal and ambition, found in her the tranquility he desperately craved. She became the embodiment of a rescue from chaos, a queen whose gentleness stood in stark contrast to the tempest he had wrought. Her strategy, though unspoken, lay in her modest grace and unwavering compliance. She never challenged the king's will. Instead, she mirrored it. When she walked into the chapel, her gown was simple rather than lavish. Her head slightly bowed, courtiers whispered that her beauty was not in jewels, but in the serenity she brought to a court still reeling from Anne's fall. In those early days, Henry was entranced by the idea of a peaceful home, and Jane offered her hand as the promise of domestic calm. Then, the moment the king had long craved arrived, Jane became pregnant. From the first sign, the palace buzzed with anticipation. Factions that had sputtered in Anne's era now rallied behind Jane's coming child. There was a sudden scramble for influence. Dukes and bishops sought to be godfathers. Physicians exchanged bribes for prime positions, and priests offered whispered prayers. The race for power circled around the womb of the queen. For a son would secure Henry's legacy and settle the tumult once and for all. As Jane's belly swelled, the pressure mounted. Doctors in stiff collars hovered by her bedside, measuring her pulse. Noting every kick, monks chanted in the dim chapel, carrying holy water to sprinkle on her pillow. Henry himself visited each dawn, his eyes shining with both hope and dread. Every letter from foreign courts inquired about her condition, for the fate of kingdoms hung upon the silhouette of a royal cradle. But in those final hours, tragedy struck. The palace's medicine was rudimentary at best. Herbal potions, bloodletting, but no guarantee of safety. Late into the night, Jane's labour grew complicated. Physicians debated whether to intervene, weighing the risk of caesarean, almost always fatal for the mother, against the chance of saving the infant. In the flicker of candlelight, the decision was made they would spare the baby's life first. Hoping the queen's body would recover, they pressed their warmed compresses against her abdomen, whispered urgent prayers, and steeled themselves for whatever lay ahead. At dawn, the palace erupted in both jubilation and misery. A son, cried a strong, healthy prince, later named Edward. Henry, tears glistening, beheld his heir and proclaimed Jane his true queen. But the joy was heartbreak half born. Jane's strength ebbed away. Her face grew pale. In her private chamber, ginger poultices lay soaked in sweat, bandages stained and fraying. Henry knelt at her bedside, clutching her hand. As she drifted in and out of conscience, her breaths came shallow. And though the boy was safe, Jane's body succumbed to infection. In the hush following her last exhalation, the court fell silent. No trumpets heralded her passing. Instead, the echo of distant hawk calls filled the empty halls. Henry's grief was raw. He ordered that Edward be raised in Jane's memory and built a chapel at her tomb. In his public statements, he referred to Jane as his only true wife, as if to honour her sacrifice and forever contrast her fate with the tragedies before and after. As Edward grew, he clung to fragments of his mother's legacy. Nannies whispered her lullabies, soft and gentle as spring rain. Portraits showed her pale smile hovering over his cradle. In the nursery's silent corners, the ghost of Jane's kindness seemed to linger, a tender light amid the shadows of court intrigues. Even in later years, Jane's story stood out, a queen whose life was brief yet crowned by motherhood, whose death laid bare the perils of childbirth in an age of scant medicine. She became the ideal mother in the king's memory, the one who gave him his long-sought heir at the cost of her own life. Her gentle spirit was a fleeting balm in the savage tapestry of Tudor history. And so, as your eyelids grow heavy and sleep tiptoes near, let the tale of Jane Seymour's selfless love and tragic end drift you into dreams. Recall her serene countenance, the hush of her chamber, and the newborn prince's first cries. Feel the tender sorrow of a mother's sacrifice, and let it soothe you into the softest slumber. Before the next chapter of Tudor darkness unfolds, the fourth wife, Anne of Cleves. Political porn and public humiliation now. Dear listener, as your eyelids grow heavy once more, drift with me from the silent echoes of Jane Seymour's tender chamber into a world where marriage was a chess move and beauty a casualty of politics. Here stands Anne of Cleves, Henry VIII's fourth wife, whose union was forged by treaty and unravelled in public shame. Anne arrived in England under the banner of diplomacy. Henry, eager to secure an alliance with the powerful Catholic princes of the Holy Roman Empire, agreed to wed the Duchess of Cleves. The marriage treaty, carefully negotiated by Thomas Cromwell, promised mutual defence and trade, benefits an ironclad bond against the restless tides of Protestant reform. The royal court's heralds lauded Anne as a German jewel, her beauty and virtue immortalised in glowing dispatches across Europe. Portraits by the finest court painters depicted her with alabaster skin and serene grace, a foreign treasure destined to strengthen Henry's reign. But the stage was set for a crushing disappointment. When Anne first stepped from her barge at Greenwich, Henry beheld her face and recoiled. So the story goes, he compared her unflatteringly to a Flanders mare, a remark that spread like wildfire through the palace. There was no pressing the pause button on first impressions. In an era before photography, portraits served as stand-ins for reality, and Anne's image, though elegant, had been idealized. The actual moment of their meeting, a real-life Renaissance snapshot, revealed a different woman, clothed in heavy furs and unfamiliar airs, not quite matching the luminous vision Henry had purchased on paper. Humiliated and resolute, Henry demanded an annulment with astonishing speed. He called upon the same pope who had refused his divorce from Catherine of Aragon, insisting that this new marriage also be declared null and void. Cromwell rallied support among sympathetic bishops, and within weeks, the political winds shifted. Anne, for her part, agreed to the annulment without contest, a rare concession that spared her the fate of execution that befell Anne Boleyn. In exchange, she received a generous settlement, lavish estates, an annual income that surpassed most nobles', and the courtesy title Sister of the King. Yet this merciful treatment did not spare Anne from a life of isolation. Though she was now the king's sister, her days at court were carefully circumscribed. She dwelt in comfortable seclusion at Richmond Palace, surrounded by a contingent of servants, but rarely in the intimate circle of royal festivities. Rumours whispered through the corridors that her finances were tightly overseen by Cromwell's agents. Every coin she spent was reported back to the council. Every visitor logged in ledgers. Courtier, awkward under the weight of her official status yet uncertain of her influence, kept their distance. Some gossiped that she was watched like a prize mare doted upon, but never truly free. This dramatic reversal left a stain on Henry's reputation abroad. The European courts, which once hailed the alliance as a masterstroke, now whispered of the English king's fickle whims. Envoys from France and Spain noted how the German jewel had been returned so swiftly, sparking speculation that Henry valued his own pleasure above diplomatic honour. Letters flown on swift horses carried the news to Vienna and Rome, prompting raised eyebrows among the Holy Roman Emperor's council. Anne's public withdrawal replaced a shining prize with an uneasy example, a cautionary tale that royal marriages were transactional and that sovereign favour could vanish as quickly as it was granted. In the dim corridors of Richmond, Anne found solace in quiet pursuits. She practiced embroidery by candlelight, stitching vivid flowers into silk, each petal a memory of her homeland. She wrote letters to her family in Cleves, her words polite, yet tinged with uncertainty, a mix of gratitude and gentle lament. Yet, even these letters required approval before dispatch. The ink was dry before the courier departed the palace gates, bound for foreign courts that once dreamed of her union. As winters passed and Henry's next bride arrived, Anne remained untouched by the scandal of her annulment. She was never accused of treason or adultery. Her role was purely political, and she had fulfilled it. Yet the shadow of that fateful first meeting lingered like a ghost in every public ceremony. Whenever Henry passed by her lodgings, crown adorned and sceptre in hand, the memory of a failed marriage clung to the walls like mildew on damp stone. Nevertheless, Anne's survival, her ability to outlast both Cromwell's fall from power and the frequent shifts of court intrigue became legendary. Young ladies of the court whispered of her grace under pressure, her refusal to rail against her fate. She attended Christmas festivities with decorum, offered her name in prayer lists for the king's health, and maintained a discreet presence at church services. In time, her isolation turned into something resembling respect. She was neither queen nor commoner, but a living monument to the impermanence of royal favour. And so, as you drift closer to the edge of sleep, picture Anne of Cleves in her quiet chamber, the soft glow of candles reflecting off her calm profile, a cup of spiced wine at her side. Hear the distant echo of trumpets in the courtyard below, and know that her story of political alliance, sudden rejection, and courageous survival lingers in the shadows of Tudor gossip. Let the gentle sadness of her fate carry you into dreams where power and desire remain forever entwined, and where the fourth wife's memory rests in peaceful resignation, far from the public stage that once celebrated her and then swiftly cast her aside. The fifth wife, Catherine Howard, youth executed, and the spy of sensual secrets drift gently from the hushed corridors where Anne of Cleves endured her quiet exile. And let your mind unfurl into the tragic bloom and abrupt withering of Catherine Howard, Henry VIII's fifth queen, a mere child, plucked into royal peril and condemned by whispered spies and scandalous intrigue. Catherine was crowned queen, while still in the bloom of youth, barely 18 summers old, when she wed the king whose portraits she had scarcely dared to dream about. In those early courtly months, her fresh-faced vibrancy cast a hopeful glow over the palace, a living counterpoint to the mourning and loss that had followed Jane Seymour's death. Courtiers watched her laughter replace the solemn silences left by previous wives' sorrows, and they whispered that at last Henry had found a partner untouched by the harsh trials that had broken his earlier matches. But behind Catherine's playful smile lay secrets as dark as any Tudor night. Before her marriage, she had known Thomas Culpeper and Francis Dereham, names that did not echo in the annals of royalty, but in the hidden alcoves of youthful indiscretion. Dereham, a distant kinsman, enjoyed Catherine's affections during her time as a lady in waiting, and Culpeper, a handsome courtier, captured her heart in whispered trysts beneath the tapestry-lined walls. Their rendezvous were cloaked in the sport of young love. Yet love at court was never innocent. For spies served the ever-watchful eye of the king. When Henry grew suspicious, some say from catching an eager glance or overhearing a hushed exchange, those who coveted Catherine's favour fed the rumours into Cromwell's eager ear. Officials loyal to the king gathered evidence letters torn and hastily hidden, servants coerced into testimony, and hushed confessions, wrung from terrified confidantes. The private escapades of a girl scarcely out of childhood were dissected and paraded as proof of treasonous betrayal at her secret trial. Held beneath torchlight in a council chamber, Catherine faced charges so grave they brooked no defence. The courtroom was packed with men who once greeted her with curtsies, now lined up as prosecutors. There were no letters from foreign princes to intervene, no sympathetic jurors to hesitate. The judge, chosen at Henry's behest, read out the accusations with clinical detachment: adultery with the king's servants, a betrayal of the highest order. In Tudor law, adultery by a queen equaled treason, a crime demanding death. Within days, preparations for execution were underway. On a cold December morning, Catherine was brought to Tower Green, her cheeks pale beneath the flicker of torchlight. The hushed crowd, drawn by morbid fascination, watched the scaffold rise like a final flower opening in frost. When the executioner's sword arced through the air, Catherine's startled cry pierced the winter air, then was cut short with chilling finality. Her body remained still. The young queen's life ended by a blade that gleamed in the dawn. Her execution was a public admonition, a stark warning to every noble who might dare court favour in secret. They called her Catherine the Fallen, a cautionary legend whispered in gilded halls and whispered beneath velvet shrouds. Young ladies of the court trembled at the memory of her fate, noting how absolute power could turn the most favoured blossom into a withered bloom in a single breath. In the years that followed, Catherine's legacy lay in hushed tales of caution. People spoke of the bright-eyed girl who danced at banquets, now reduced to a name in execution records and a vacant cell in the tower. Ballads carried her story through village taverns. Soft tunes, tinged with sorrow love's folly at the hands of royal decree. Preachers invoked her end as moral warning to errant hearts, and playwrights later dramatized her tale, turning her youth and demise into tragic spectacle. Yet beneath the layers of scandal and political theatre, there lingered a faint ache for the life that might have been. If Catherine's indiscretions had remained those of mere mortals, a whispered promise under the moonlight, would her story have ended differently in her final prayers, offered swiftly before the blade fell? She may have sought mercy for sins, unworthy of death. But mercy was not the currency of Henry's court, where every moral transgression against the king's person was a mortal wound to the realm itself. And so, as your eyes grow heavy and your breaths lengthen, let the memory of Catherine Howard's brief, bright reign and abrupt end drift you into a reflective slumber. Picture the trembling youth, the harsh glare of torchlight, the final crack of steel, and the murmur of the crowd as they turned away. Know that in the Tudor world, innocence could be as dangerous as rebellion, and youth, a perilous folly under the shadow of a king's wrath. Let that uneasy quiet settle around you as you drift towards sleep, carrying the chilling echo of a child, queen's fate into your dreams. The sixth wife, Catherine Parr. Survival in the religious chess game. As you sink deeper into your bed's embrace, let me guide you from the tragic execution of Catherine Howard into the final, quiet victory of Catherine Parr, the only one of Henry VIII's wives to outlive him. Thanks to political finesse and a steady hand in the swirling maelstrom of Tudor religion, arriving at court through the recommendation of the Duke of Leicester, Catherine Parr was not merely a new bride but a bridge between the warring camps of Protestant reformers and traditional Catholics. The Duke, sensing an opportunity to stabilize Henry's kingdom, introduced Catherine as a unifying presence, a queen who could soothe doctrinal divides with her gentle scholarship and tactful diplomacy. She accepted this role with grace, mastering theological debate under the tutelage of leading divines and composing her own reflections in a small volume, later known as Prayers or Meditations. In it, she wove heartfelt devotion with balanced theology, demonstrating extraordinary intellectual poise for a woman of her time. Yet such erudition aroused suspicion among the hardline Catholic faction at court. They pounced on Prayers or Meditations, claiming it bordered on heresy. The pamphlets flew. Catherine was a covert Protestant agitator. They whispered, a queen who sought to undermine the Church of Rome from within the royal bedchamber. The rumours reached Henry's ear, and for a chilling moment, Catherine faced the very real threat of being branded a heretic herself. The king, whose religious zeal could shift with a new whim, nearly signed an edict condemning her to the stake. It was Thomas Seymour, Henry's brother and Catherine's true ally, who interceded. He reminded Henry of Catherine's loyalty, her gentle care for the king during his illnesses, and her invaluable role in negotiating peace between religious factions. Seymour's quiet persuasion and Catherine's own humble pleas saved her from the flames. In that breathless pause between accusation and condemnation, Catherine learned that survival at Henry's court required more than piety. It demanded shrewd navigation of both faith and favour, drawing on the lessons of her predecessors. Catherine Parr practiced a delicate balancing act. She offered Henry the deference he craved, praising his strength and wisdom, even as she quietly corresponded with leading reformers. In her chambers, she would slip into earnest discourse on scripture with Protestant theologians, then attend Mass with fervent devotion before the very same Catholic prelates who eyed her suspiciously. She never allowed her convictions to overshadow her respect for the king's authority, and he, in turn, valued her counsel on matters both domestic and ecclesiastical. Still, Catherine knew better than to rest on diplomatic laurels. She maintained a network of informants, discreet ladies-in-waiting, and faithful servants tasked with observing the tides of court opinion. If a whisper of renewed hostility reached her ear, she prepared an apology or sought royal pardon with sincere humility. She understood that, at any moment, an ill word or a misplaced gaze could plunge her into the same deadly intrigue that had claimed so many before. This vigilance paid off. When Henry VIII's life ended, Catherine emerged unscathed by scandal and free from the shadow of execution, widowed yet still vibrant. She chose to marry Thomas Seymour, who had once saved her life, in a modest ceremony that reflected their genuine affection rather than royal ceremony. Though her second marriage was tragically cut short by her own untimely death following childbirth, Catherine Parr had secured a legacy far different from that of the queens who came before her. Her greatest inheritance was not an heir, but an example, a queen who survived the most dangerous of courts by wisdom, tact, and unwavering composure. Her prayers or meditations continued to be read in households across England, a testament to her faith and intellect. Historians later lauded her as the first Englishwoman to publish under her own name. A subtle but lasting victory in an age that rarely recognized women's voices. And so, as you drift toward slumber, remember Catherine Parr in her quiet cloister at Chelsea, pen in hand and heart fortified by both prayer and prudence. Hear the soft rustle of her pages turning by candlelight. See the gentle curve of her brow as she weighs each word against the realities of power. Let her patient courage and thoughtful balance lull you into dreams, where a queen's wisdom outlasts blades and ballots alike, and where survival itself becomes the sweetest triumph of all. And so, the 6 wives of Henry VIII, from the dutiful Catherine of Aragon, to the ambitious Anne Boleyn, the sacrificial Jane Seymour, the resigned Anne of Cleves, the tragic Catherine Howard, and the wily Catherine Parr, have together painted a harrowing tableau of power, passion, and the instinct for survival within the Tudor inner court. Each faced her own fate, and each tragedy taught a lesson. Catherine of Aragon shows us that loyalty can be paid for with freedom and honor. Anne Boleyn demonstrates that beauty and cunning, if not handled with care, can swiftly become a deadly trap. Jane Seymour reveals that sacrifice for the prince can still invite personal tragedy. When archaic medicine fails, a fragile life. Anne of Cleves reminds us that political alliances, even glittering ones, are limited if the gem cannot fill the void of trust. Catherine Howard stands as a warning that youth and pride, when clashing with royal law, can end with an unforgiving sword. And finally, Catherine Parr exemplifies the power of wisdom and balance she survived through intellect and an understanding of religious snares, closing the tragic cycle with a gentle anthem of survival. In the hush of night, these tales drift like sleepy breaths along the ancient stone walls, reminding us that gilded crowns can still be stained with blood. Sweet love can hide peril, and survival sometimes lurks behind the most benign exterior. Let these dark yet profound lessons lull you into dreams, where the Tudor past sighs softly, summoning those brave enough to open their eyes in the dead of night. And, in reflecting on these 10 horrific secrets of Henry VIII, a stark historical lesson emerges. Unchecked power is a disaster waiting to happen. Henry's absolute control over both state and church left no counterbalance when he became both sovereign and supreme head of the Church of England. Every check on his authority, from conscience to canon law, collapsed. Century later, Montesquieu would warn us that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. Yet Henry's reign illustrates it in vivid detail. Once a vigorous prince who loved music, sport, and poetry, he transformed his throne into a launchpad for cruelty. The second lesson concerns the abuse of religion as a political weapon. Henry's so-called Reformation dissolving monasteries and seizing church wealth was less about spiritual renewal and more about enriching the crown and settling scores. When faith becomes merely a tool of statecraft, tragedy and division inevitably follow. His shift from defender of the faith to supreme head of the Church of England stands as a cautionary example of the perils of politicizing belief. Finally, that festering ulcer on Henry's leg became a powerful symbol of his rule. Beneath a dazzling exterior lay a core of rot. No matter how glittering the pageantry, internal decay will erode the noblest facade. Let this be our reminder: any institution or system, political, religious, or otherwise left without oversight, is at grave risk of sliding into the abyss of misconduct, no matter how lofty its original purpose. In remembering Henry VIII's darkest secrets, we arm ourselves with the vigilance needed to prevent such ruin in our own time. Even half a millennium on, the grim saga of Henry VIII still echoes in our digital age. Consider how the concentration of power in a single person, as when Henry became both sovereign and supreme religious authority, mirrors modern leaders who exploit legal systems to silence dissent or seize private assets. When a head of state today uses emergency decrees to shut down opposition parties or confiscates critical media outlets, public outcry immediately recalls Henry's dissolution of the monasteries, an ostensible reform that in reality enriched the crown and crushed rivals. Likewise, the endlessly recycled rumours of Henry's hidden children, shadows of unwanted heirs, whispered through court corridors, find new life in celebrity, gossip, and political scandal. Whenever a politician or public figure faces questions about secret bank accounts or clandestine trusts, social media buzzes with speculation of illegitimate beneficiaries and undisclosed favours. Much as Tudor courtiers once speculated that Catherine Boleyn or other ladies had borne the king private offspring, the mechanics have changed. Now tweets replace tavern whispers, but the dynamic of rumour as a weapon endures. Henry also mastered what we would now call political messaging and media manipulation. Under the guise of religious reform, he shattered centuries-old institutions, all the while presenting himself to his subjects as a defender of true faith. In our era of instant headlines and 24-hour news cycles, similar tactics play out in the careful distraction of public attention governments launching bold-sounding initiatives to overshadow scandals, or massaging statistics to portray reforms as benevolent breakthroughs. Just as Henry's proclamations masked his personal aggrandizement, today's information flows can conceal power grabs behind the veneer of progress. Finally, reflect on that festering ulcer that Henry endured and attempted to hide with layers of silk and incense. It stands as a potent symbol no matter how grand the facade. Untreated wounds, physical or psychological, will eventually fester into crisis. In a world of advanced medicine and mental health awareness, we still encounter stigmas that lead individuals and institutions to conceal suffering until it spirals into tragedy. The lesson is clear. Comprehensive care of body and mind remains essential if we are to prevent the humanitarian disasters that follow neglect. In these parallels, the Tudor court's darkest secrets resonate as a cautionary chorus. They remind us that absolute power unchecked, religion wielded as a political cudgel, rumor weaponized against the vulnerable, and unhealed personal trauma all bear the seeds of catastrophe. The imperative for our age is vigilance to insist on robust checks and balances, to differentiate genuine reform from self-serving agendas, to question the whisper as well as the proclamation, and to cultivate both public health and private well-being before hidden wounds bloom into ruin. Only then can we hope to break free from the shadows cast by Henry's reign, carrying forward a lesson written in blood and broken bones into a more humane tomorrow. Finally, the tale of Henry VIII's 10 horrifying secrets is not merely the tragedy of one monarch, but a profound lesson in human nature when power goes unchecked, from the betrayal of faith to the obsessive quest for a male heir, from gluttonous excess to brutal torture, and culminating in his dark, agonizing death. We witness how absolute authority can consume both body and soul. The Tudor saga, then, is far more than a dry chronology of events. It serves as a mirror, reflecting the necessity of balance in power, the importance of clarity in belief, and the imperative of humanity within ambition. When we contemplate that gleaming golden throne, we must ask ourselves, where does true value lie? In the glittering spectacle, or in the steadfastness of moral conviction? Consider how the king twisted scripture to justify his divorce, only to crown himself head of the church. How he chased rumor of hidden children like a hound pursuing a phantom. How his lavish feasts masked a festering ulcer that no medicine could heal. How his courts morphed into arenas of terror. And how, at the end, even the most formidable ruler could not escape the decay he had helped unleash. Each secret is a cautionary vignette, a dark fragment that, when woven together, paints a portrait of a soul undone by its own dominion. In our own time, this narrative resonates powerfully. We, too, grapple with leaders who exploit faith, who centralize authority beyond accountability, and whose appetites, literal or figurative, leave wreckage in their wake. We, too, witness institutions corroded from within, whether by avarice, ambition, or malignant ideology. And just as in Tudor England, the spectre of unchecked influence threatens our shared humanity. So let us carry forward these lessons. Let us demand systems where power answers to principle rather than personal whim. Let us cultivate beliefs grounded in introspection, not mere dogma. Let our aspirations be tempered by compassion, remembering that no pedestal of authority is immune to rot, for when we lose sight of these truths, the golden facade may shine for a moment, but beneath it, all too swiftly, the rot will spread. Thank you for journeying with us through this dark chapter of history. If you've found value in these revelations and wish to explore further untold stories of other famed figures, please continue to join our channel. Like this video, share it with those who appreciate history's hidden depths, and subscribe to ensure you never miss our next unveiling. And be sure to ring the notification bell so that whenever another earth-shattering secret emerges from the past, you will be the first to know. We appreciate your company on this exploration, and we look forward to seeing you again on our next voyage into history's most startling mysteries.